Bonjour les amis, bienvenue à Paris, welcome to Paris. Bonjour, bonjour, thank you for joining me today, and look where I'm standing. I promised the 7th arrondissement, and this is probably its most famous landmark, right there. Mademoiselle Eiffel in all of her glory. The clouds are coming in, which is interesting. It was really pretty all day. How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining me this weekend. This is really interesting if you look at the Champ de Mars. Bonjour Cindy. If you look at the Champ de Mars, it looks like, I don't know, it looks like cows have been grazing on the grass all summer. Or it looks like they haven't watered it in 10 years because there's no grass left on this section. And as you look towards the Grand Palais éphémère in the back, you see some scaffolding. Ça va, Ricky? Very happy to hear it. More scaffolding on that side, looking towards the Trocadero. You know this place is going to undergo a major restoration in anticipation of the Olympic Games. This place is, I don't think we'll recognize it in a few years. One good thing that should come out of it is I think they're supposed to take out that wall that goes around the Eiffel Tower, and there'll be a really nice walk here. So all the way to the Trocadero, in fact, because even the bridge is supposed to be more or less pedestrian only. So that should be interesting. So before we get going, I'm going to show you Mademoiselle Eiffel one last time. There are long lines to visit as always. I know she has a lot of fans. I see some brave people climbing up the stairs on that side. I see them go up to the second floor. Some of you might have done that. I used to do it with Alec, my son. As he was growing up, it was always a popular thing to do. All right, so I thought today I would take you through the 7th arrondissement because this is where I'm working this week. And I arrived today in Paris, and I'm on my way actually somewhere. So this stroll is a way of taking you along with me before I reach, or until I reach the metro, at which point I'll say goodbye. But for now, let's enjoy some 7th arrondissement vibes, shall we? So many people, so many languages spoken. The entire world is here. Bonjour, Sharon. I mean, seriously, look at the grass. Everything is gone. Do you see all the bare patches? Wow. So we're leaving the Champ de Mars, the famous Champ de Mars, which has always kind of anchored this neighborhood with a couple of other landmarks. It has seen some very famous events. Some of the most famous events. I can't get enough of the Eiffel Tower, so I'm going to flip around one more time and show her to you. You know, it all started for the Champ de Mars when they built the military school, Louis XV, and it was the training grounds of a lot of those soldiers. And then different events were organized through the centuries. You had the famous Fête de la Fédération, exactly 1 year after the storming of the Bastille. And this is really what we celebrate when we celebrate on July 14th, because we don't call it Bastille Day, we celebrate this big celebration that was here with the king, the very young republic, and it all happened here on the Champ de Mars. Later in the 19th century, there were horse races here. Did you know that? Until they opened the horse tracks of Longchamp. And let's not forget all these world fairs. There were 4 just in the 19th century, and of course the big one in 1900. So yes, you might say that if the Champ de Mars could talk, the Champ de Mars could indeed tell a lot of stories. So I'm going to make my way through the 7th arrondissement. Bonjour Marcy, bonjour friends, thank you for joining us today. I know you're busy. I don't know about the US, but in France, school starts again on Monday. So the US or other parts of the world watching maybe. This is a nice alleyway, look at those trees. So school starts on Monday. You'll have a lot of unhappy children and maybe unhappy teachers on Monday. We're going to make our way across some of these streets, and I'll tell you a few stories that happened here. You know, often the 7th arrondissement is reduced to the Eiffel Tower or Rue Claire, but there's a lot more to say about this place. On these streets here, in this section, everything you see, all these buildings, were erected right around the time of the 1900 World Fair, so probably right after. So you might say this was a pretty posh neighborhood at the time. But the truth is, there was non-stop development from the 17th century on. Oh, it's so quiet here. I love it. Look at the trees. This is the best time to see those, or maybe in the fall too. So I'm sure this all looks familiar to you. So back in the day, the 7th arrondissement, which of course wasn't called the 7th arrondissement, was really fields, farmland. There were orchards, they grew fruit and vegetable, and it was outside the Paris city wall. It only became part of Paris when they built the Farmers General Wall, the Welcome Generals, that guy was teasing, the Farmers General Wall just a few years before the French Revolution. At that point, it was incorporated in the city. But do you know who was one of the first people who saw the potential of this area? The land here could flood. I mean, the Seine would flood, so the land was a lot of swamps. It was hard to work this land, but a royal actually saw the potential of this area of the 7th arrondissement as we know it today. And that person was someone who is known as Queen Margot, Marguerite de Valois. She was Catherine de Medici's daughter. She created a park here in the very early 17th century, a park that was rumored to be as beautiful, as big as the Tuileries Gardens. We never hear about that, but she was one of the first ones to really invest, if you will, in this neighborhood. After her death, the king who succeeded her ex-husband, Henry IV, was Louis XIII, and he sold large parts of the property here to the first developers. So we're looking at the 17th century. We are on Avenue de la Bourdonnais. This is a street that was opened in the 18th century. There were two big events that brought more and more people here, especially affluent people, and convinced them to invest here and build some of the gorgeous hôtels particuliers and buildings we know today. The first one was Louis XIV, who builds Les Invalides, a military hospital of sorts for his soldiers at the end of the 17th century. And almost a century later, one of his descendants, Louis XV, who builds the military school. And so what happens then is that traditional neighborhoods, like the Marais, becomes a little bit outdated. And the affluent classes just move west towards this part of Paris. I am standing right almost in the middle of Avenue de la Bourdonnais right now, might get run over. This building here that looks more like an official building, and goodness me, we do have a lot of those here. You can see up here there is a sign that says Ville de Paris, 7th arrondissement, École primaire communale 1884. So this is part of all the schools that were created by a gentleman known as Jules Ferry. His statue is right here. He was part of the French government in the late 1800s, and he's the one who created those new laws about education that made French education secular, mandatory, and free. And a lot of, at that time, they built schools very, very fast, all over Paris, all over France. We refer to them as la communale, which means really public school. And today it's still a school. Now, they have something in common, all these schools hastily built at the end of the 19th century. They almost look like prisons, don't you think? I used to attend some of them when I was younger in northern France. I mean, the architecture is rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Stark. Ah, it's quiet on this side. Boy, such a nice break from the busy Champ de Mars. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, you have all the accoutrements of the French official or public buildings. And there is a reminder above those two doors that once upon a time there was une école des garçons, école de garçons for the boys, and on the left, école de filles. But today it says Ville de Paris, école élémentaire mixte. So this is a primary school mixing boys and girls. So times have changed, eh? In the back is a very big gymnasium, a library as well that belongs to the city. So this is quite a massive complex here. So back to my little story of when the creation of l'Hôtel des Invalides, les Invalides first in the 17th century, and then a century later, the military school brought a lot of money here, a lot of developers, and it really never stopped after that. It became a very, very desirable area. In fact, the street ahead of us, if I don't get run over, voila, the street ahead of us is named Rapp, and you know it. Avenue Rapp was carved out later. It was carved out during the Second Empire by Baron Haussmann. And Avenue Rapp also attracted not only affluent classes, but also architects, renowned architects. And one of these houses you see ahead of us, I'm sure you've walked past it. I'm going to stand right outside so you can enjoy it if you've never been up close. In 1901, which is when a lot of these buildings were erected in this neighborhood, in 1901, this facade, that building I'm headed to now, won first prize for a very popular contest, the contest of the best facade in Paris. And if you remember, I took you on another virtual tour last winter in the second arrondissement along the famous Rue Réaumur. That contest was created at the time when they carved out the Rue Réaumur in 1896 or 1897, and after that they extended it to all the arrondissements in Paris. Well, this building we're about to see won the contest in 1901. And this is one of the most spectacular examples of Art Nouveau architecture in Paris. And all of the characteristics of the Art Nouveau are here. It's hard to see it in the summer if you're too far away. In the winter, I would stand on the other side, but with the trees, you wouldn't see much. But you see how you have all these curves inspired by nature and the female body. And you see how this is exactly the opposite of what had come before that with Haussmann. Because Haussmann was all about symmetry. Some people might say it was a bit predictable. But look, you see how that window is projecting itself out? But on the other side, there's a flat window. So there's imbalance there, and it's on purpose. And you can see that all over the facade. Now, the cool detail about this home here, that door is of course famous because some people say that if you picture it upside down, it's going to make you smile. I'll let you ponder that for a second. What's really cool about this house is that it was commissioned by one of the most famous ceramicists of the Belle Époque. And he wanted a place to live, and he asked Jules Lavirotte, Lavirotte was the architect, to build it for him. Bigot was the name of the ceramicist. And you can see the use of the green glazed earthenware on the facade, which is a style, which is part of the Art Nouveau style. Typically, you'll have little touches of blues and greens, but on this facade, this was the first facade to use that much of the glazed earthenware that ceramicists like Monsieur Bigot were famous for. All right, so Lavirotte built this for Bigot. And then Lavirotte needed a place to live. So he built himself another one, not quite as grand, but still, in that dead-end street there on the left, which you know, called Square Rapp, le Square Rapp. We have some pretty nice real estate as well. It's very secluded. Next to that post office sign. So Alexandre Bigot got to live in the big one that he had commissioned. And Monsieur Lavirotte got to live in this square. Look how calm it is. So of course this is a private property, not easy to get in. I'm just going to stand here so you can see the facade right there on the left. Look at that. Look at that, friends. Not bad, eh? Picture that. So there are some beautiful buildings in Paris. And you can see that we're not in a Haussmannian style. I mean, it may have been inspired by Haussmann, but this is way after Haussmann. You see how there are curves everywhere. It's not those straight lines, all that symmetry that he was so fond of. That's gone, that's over. And Art Nouveau, of course, didn't last that long. It was over by World War I. People had decided it wasn't great anymore and moved on to other styles. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of the buildings. We lost a lot of the metro entrances designed by the famous Hector Guimard. We lost a lot just because it wasn't cool anymore. So this neighborhood that stood for a long time outside the city walls was incorporated by the Farmers General Wall in the 18th century, finally became part of Paris, and it wasn't the 7th arrondissement until Napoleon III incorporated a lot of the sections, districts and villages around Paris in 1860 and created additional arrondissements, and this became the 7th. But did you know that originally, in the first 12 arrondissements that were created after the French Revolution, this was the 10th. We would have been walking in the 10th arrondissement. Today we are walking in the 7th. Things change in Paris. You're right, Avi, there's some really nice architecture in Barcelona. Gaudi, I remember visiting. It's a great city too. I need to go back there. So we're going to take Rue Saint-Dominique. And you know, back in the day, when the 7th arrondissement, this place, was just fields, and when they were trying to grow fruit and vegetable, and when Queen Margot built her big park here, Rue de Saint-Dominique would have been one of the small pathways crossing that area. Picture it as a small pathway, very pastoral. Hard to know. Hard to do, I know. Now, one thing that I was going to say that bugs me, but that annoys me a little bit when people talk about the 7th arrondissement is they always talk about the same things, you know, all the landmarks. This is, after all, one of the highest concentrations of embassies, official buildings, and even top French schools. But we forget that a long time ago, it was not just all pretty buildings. In fact, this section of Rue Saint-Dominique is a great reminder of that, because back in the day, in the 1900s, in fact, this section of the neighborhood would have been much more humble, much more working class. And at that time, most of the buildings, just like in Montmartre and other places, would have been 2 floors max. And you can see those facades are not as striking as the ones we've just seen. The reason is we are in a neighborhood known as the Gros Caillou. Caillou, Gros Caillou, the big rock. Did you know that each arrondissement in Paris has actually 4 neighborhoods? So when you say you live in an arrondissement, always make sure to know what neighborhood you live in, because Parisians know what you're referring to. Well, here in the 7th arrondissement, we are in my favorite part of the 7th, which is known as Le Gros Caillou. And the reason I like it is because, in spite of tourism, in spite of all these amazing buildings that we've seen, the embassies and the official buildings, you still have actual Parisian life here. And that dates back to the early 19th century and before, because back in the day, this is the neighborhood, as it grew, where all the workers, the artisans who worked at building Les Invalides in the 17th century, or later the military school, this is where they lived. This is where they worked and lived. So this was very much a working class neighborhood. And even today, among all the tourists and all these fancy restaurants like Café Lignac and all the good places you know along Rue Saint-Dominique, if you walk around on Monday morning, you will still see kids going to school. You will still see moms picking them up after school. It is a real neighborhood. And I'm really glad that actually the hotels where our groups stay are in the heart of this neighborhood. I think it's a much livelier and almost more authentic neighborhood than other parts of the 7th that are almost museums, really, because of the architecture there. So we're going to make our way through Le Gros Caillou, all the way to a very famous market street that I'm sure you all know, that is also part of that neighborhood. And yet nobody ever mentions that. Saint-Dominique. When Baron Haussmann in the second half of the 19th century tackled his almost 20-year remodel of Paris, he destroyed a lot of streets in medieval Paris, closer to downtown, closer to the river, but he also destroyed a lot of the former buildings along streets like Rue Saint-Dominique. So the Rue Saint-Dominique we see today is probably not as grand as what was here. You're right, Avi. That's a very interesting building. Here is a really popular place for restaurants. This fountain here. A lot of this is from the 19th century. The Fontaine de Mars, the Fountain of Mars across the street, that restaurant where the Obamas had dinner. It specializes in southwestern food from southwestern France, where I'm from. Lots of good places and lots of tourists here, but locals as well. This, La Maison Bergeron, is one of the prettiest boulangeries you can find in Paris. If you go inside, the ceiling, the decor is extraordinary. It's actually one of the oldest buildings on the street. And I can see the plaque, in fact. It says the architect signed it right here. His name was Ferdinand Ball, and it was 1896, you see, so this is before the World Fair of 1900. And so this boulangerie, it's always crowded, it's always packed, they make very good things. I'm gonna try and get a peek at the ceiling for you from here, you see? Of course it's been restored, huh? The decor. But it's rather grand. So a popular place. Lots of good restaurants around here. Very Parisian atmosphere, that's why people love it. But the reason they love it is because it's also real. The Gros Caillou, the big rock, has kept some of its, well, I wouldn't go so far as saying working class, but some of its more humble origins. If we don't come here along Rue Saint-Dominique before Baron Haussmann got his way with it, we would have seen a lot more of these hôtels particuliers, private mansions like the one on the right. This one is now the Embassy of Romania. It's a little lost here along Rue Saint-Dominique. That's not where most of the embassies are, but there would have been more at the time. And in the back streets, like I said, humble buildings where all the workers who worked on those massive construction sites, like Les Invalides, l'École Militaire, and of course the Eiffel Tower. A lot of them. Bonjour, welcome. It doesn't matter if you're late, don't worry. There's always the replay. I am taking you on a walk. He's letting me go, he's insisting. Merci. Who says Parisians are not nice when they drive? Merci, monsieur. I'm walking you through the 7th arrondissement, and we're, as always, linking the past to the present and trying to understand what the 7th arrondissement is and what it used to be. There are some very interesting stories here. I'm crossing a very busy street. Not as busy right now, it's Saturday. L'avenue Bosquet, B-O-S-Q-U-E-T. If I went to the left here, I would reach the Seine River. And if I went to the right, at the very end, I would reach the military school. that restaurant at the corner, Le Campanella. It's actually a pretty nice little place. I had lunch there a few times. Decent food, decent prices, and very nice service. All right, let's continue. Rue Saint-Dominique is so long. One of the longest streets in Paris and very lively, lots of shops. Pharmacies, of course. There's one here. There's always a pharmacy in France, wherever you go. Tomorrow it will be very quiet on a Sunday. And that's how you know it's a little bit more authentic as a neighborhood, because traditionally French life gets quieter on Sundays, unless you are in very touristy areas, like in Paris, in downtown Paris, and things will stay open. École maternelle, here's another school. Like I was saying, there are lots of schools around here. This is a public school, kindergarten. Yeah, I'm not surprised you enjoy the 7th arrondissement. It is a lovely place. It's safe overall. It's lively, there's great shopping. There are also some really good museums. I mean, Les Invalides, of course, is one of them, le Musée Rodin, and more. So there's a lot to do. You wouldn't even need to go anywhere. You see, I like streets like this because when you step away from the big buildings and the fancy real estate we saw earlier, this is when you can kind of see what Paris used to be back in the 19th century or even the turn of the 20th century. And I live for those moments in Paris. I've given up on medieval Paris because it's pretty much gone, thanks to Baron Haussmann. But we still have the past lurking around. Here's a church. When this neighborhood grew, they built several churches. Eventually, that was the last one, this one. They kept it because the neighborhood grew so fast. I think the population more than doubled in the 18th century. And you can see it's called Saint-Pierre du Gros Caillou, St. Peter's of the Big Rock. So we are indeed in the heart of this neighborhood I refer to as the Big Rock, you see? So this was built, like I said, I think 1825, 1826. And I am now turning, into a construction site. Rue Claire. Now this is what I refer to as the quiet part of Rue Claire. This is not the most exciting section of the street. We have a couple schools, including a private one. You can see again those pretty serious looking buildings on the right, indicating this is a school, like the one we saw earlier. Oh dear. City employee in a hurry. It's Saturday evening. He wants to get home. What, it's been at least 3 days since he returned from his long summer vacation. Gotta make the most of it. Let's go, let's go. Chop, chop. Collège Jules Romain. So collège, not a college like in other countries. Collège is your middle school. And again, the French flag, the European flag, kind of tied up for now. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. You're right, Marcel, there's so much construction, not just in Paris, but particularly in Paris. It's crazy, everywhere you go. Then again, compared to the mayhem that Haussmann created back in the day when he was remodeling the city, I'm sure this is nothing much. He would probably scoff at this. Let's enjoy this view of the Rue Claire. I am now walking past a building that is really nondescript because it's fairly new, maybe 30 years old. In this building, our president used to live, Emmanuel Macron, back in the day. So he did live on Rue Claire. The man has good taste, what can you do? Look at that, look at the sidewalk. I've got to watch where I'm stepping so I don't trip. You're lucky we're going to catch Rue Claire with some apéro vibes, huh? Because it's 6:30 p.m. in Paris now. We won't look at these because this will only hurt us when we look at the prices. The price per square meter in the 7th arrondissement is very high. So we won't even do any window licking. Lèche vitrine. How do you know it's a real neighborhood? You have your cordonnerie, of course, your cobblers. It's not a real neighborhood unless you have one of those and a pharmacy. And this is a very old store, apparently. He also makes skis. And they come here and they get their heel pads replaced. And they buy quality shoes and they keep fixing them until they actually die. And Parisians do walk a lot, so. Here's a good address for you if you come here, Le Roussillon. I've gone on several occasions. It's a pretty decent brasserie type, well, I don't know that I would call it a brasserie, it's not big enough, but a very nice restaurant. And it sits, I'm going to show it to you, it sits right under a pretty striking building, really. Look at that facade, Café Roussillon. Look at that. Not bad, eh? So this entire facade is made with Paris's signature stone, which is limestone, but it's also known as pierre de taille. So it's dressed stone, and it gives Paris a very distinct appearance. If I compare with the look of the buildings, chateaux, and houses where I live in the Loire Valley, where we use a lot of the tuffeau or tufa stone, it's a very different appearance. And this is the kind of building you would have seen in the late 19th, early 20th century, with possibly fewer floors, because you can definitely tell that floor was added later. So that building might have been just 2 floors, and this probably felt like a village in here. And I've taken you on virtual tours that you can find on YouTube to other places that used to be villages, like Les Batignolles in the 17th arrondissement, and I've shown you buildings like these. Some of them have survived. Au Bon Jardinier is now a chain, and you find it in most of the market streets in Paris. You find it here on Rue Claire, you find it Rue de Lévis in the 17th, where I used to live. You find it along the famous Rue Daguerre, another market street in the 14th arrondissement. I don't mind that it's a chain. I do mind that the produce is overpriced. It's actually quite ridiculous. And what's in season now, you still have Quetch, Mirabelle, so a lot of the plums, les prunes, and then the first grapes. The first grapes are here. So it's really funny because when I left France in 1996, the French didn't eat seedless grapes at all. But I guess we're getting more and more Americanized now, because you can see more and more seedless grapes. Here it says sans, S apostrophe, that means without, sans, pépin, pépin is seed. So they sell grapes without seed, seedless. And the Rue Claire, once a very, very active neighborhood where you would have had a lot of independent shops, several butchers, several grocery stores, several boulangers, and the same story everywhere in France, including in Tours, where I live. And slowly but surely, some of these stores replaced by chains, replaced by cafes and restaurants. Le Petit Clair is a renowned one. It still has some really great vibes, and if you come on Sunday morning, like I will tomorrow, to get some food for tomorrow, it remains very lively. And you'll see locals as well as tourists shopping here. Mon Petit Poulet, my little chicken. Mon Petit Poulet is also an endearing term, endearment term, I don't know how you put this. My little chicken. So you have your roast chicken. And when people eat at 6:30 p.m., you know they're not French. That's a fun thing for a French person to observe, actually. We have some really pretty flowers here. Ah, summer. And you do hear a lot of English spoken here. À la Mère de Famille, which is a branch of that famous confiserie, candy store, that has now partnered with Storer, so you have pastries from Storer, you have the chocolates from La Mère de Famille, and it tells you La Maison was founded in 1761. 1761. That's before the French Revolution. More cafes and terraces all along Rue Claire. Famille Marie, they specialize in honey products. They are also a chain, and you find them in most of the market streets now in Paris. Davoli, one of the oldest on the street, un traiteur, deli, but specializing in Italian food. They tell you since 1913. And of course, Josselin, another really renowned traiteur along the street. They have hot and cold dishes. The calamari, this would be hot. And then you have more here. The salads are almost gone for the day. Two pack to get close. Another branch of Au Bon Jardinier. So it's quite lively, not crowded, which is nice. And you have more of those terraces, like I was saying, little by little, all the independent shops are replaced by cafes and restaurants. And that's a little bit of a shame because if you are a local, you do need those stores where you can buy food. You do need those cobblers, cordonniers, you do need those boulangers. They still have them though. Café du Marché, a very popular address. And in typical Parisian fashion, a lot of the chairs along Rue Claire face out. They face out so you can people walk. You can people watch, sorry, not people walk. You can people watch. And like I like to say, if you are traveling with someone you have absolutely nothing to say to, you can just sit next to each other on one of those terraces, look out, and don't talk to each other. It's wonderful. And see, being who I am, I'm more curious about the back streets here because I can see a lot of these buildings are older, so I'm sure the back streets there are quite interesting in terms of architecture as you step away from Rue Claire. Boulangerie. That's right. I mean, seriously, if they had more of those facing out chairs and terraces everywhere, maybe fewer people would get a divorce. They would just go outside and sit and not talk. Instead of doing it at home and be bored, they would do it outside and be entertained by whoever's walking by. Don't you think? That's my theory, and I'm sticking with it. And as you get close to the end of the street, you see more and more brands, and higher type brands too. Whee! This guy I didn't see coming. Fortunately, he did see me. This is my favorite Mephisto store in all of France. David, the owner, took over after his father, so they've owned this store for decades. And it looks messy, but I guarantee you he's got all the newer models, all the older models. It's a little bit like going to Ollivander's to buy a wand in Harry Potter. He has a ladder and he can climb and pull out exactly the box you need and the size you need if you tell him what you're looking for. So if you look for those top quality shoes known as Mephisto, I like them dearly as a tour guide. I recommend you go there. How close am I to my former Seventh Heaven home? As far as can be, because we are on the left bank west of Paris, and I used to live right outside Vincennes. That's where I was in the eastern section of Paris. Pralus is a really good place. They make a brioche-like confection called praluline, either stuffed with pink pralines or with chocolate. I like to get them for my clients. They're very good. Clairfeur is a famous florist around here, or at least a popular one. The traiteur is empty now, about to tuck in for the night and probably for the weekend as well. Another Bon Jardinier. I mean, how many have we seen? Like 4? This is the 4th produce stand we've seen. How much are the melon here? 2 for 6. That's not bad. That's a good price. And they've got to be ripe. I can smell them from here. A lot of plums, prune. Look at that. Berries. Ah, and the grapes, Muscat. good. Well, the prices are pretty high, as you can tell. So like I was saying, in this section of the street, you have more and more higher brands. You have Le Chocolat Alain Ducasse. Alain Ducasse is here. I'm going to let those guys go. Don't want to get run over. Voila. So Alain Ducasse is here, and his chocolate are for like jewelry. Ice cream's not bad either. Another terrace and cafe, Les Téléphones, named after the big post office that used to be nearby, or maybe still is nearby. Your bazaar, which is your droguerie, the store where you can find just about everything. Claire affaire. Faire une affaire is when you strike a deal. So they imply that it's cheap, it's affordable. Something affordable along Rue Claire. Maybe I should pay them a visit. Another top brand over there, Mariage Frères, well known for their teas. And a great wine shop, Les Grandes Caves. Some prices. The connoisseurs among you will recognize some of these wines, probably, if I get a little closer like this. What else do we have here? Hope you're enjoying this walk, folks. Thanks for joining me on a Saturday. That's very nice of you. I wanted to do something before I go on tour this week. I've done a few tours this summer. I hope you've enjoyed them. And you know, they're all on YouTube, the France with Vero YouTube channel. Hey, remember to give me likes here if you are enjoying this, because it helps with YouTube, apparently. Look, I love these three buildings. Isn't that funny? It's like stairs. Dun, dun, dun. So here we are leaving Rue Claire, and I'm going to say goodbye pretty soon because I'm meeting a friend for dinner. We try to do this before or after tours when friends are in town. It's so quiet for a Saturday. This is lovely. I'm glad you're enjoying it. All right, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take you back. Let's see, let me think. I actually want to go towards Les Invalides, so I'm going to go towards Les Invalides and I'll leave you at the end of the street. How about it? Hey, it's been 42 minutes already. I did not bring Jeanne with me, my little mascot, the patron's mascot. She is at home safely. I wouldn't want to lose her while I'm on tour. She might come on the next one, we'll see. She'll definitely come for the meetups, the patron meetups in September and October, because I know some of you might want to meet Jeanne. She's been part of our adventure since 2020, after all. Thank you for the likes. Can never get tired of all these facades. Much more symmetrical here, I would say, huh? You see? What does the date say? 1898 or 1899. See, so this is post-Haussmann, so there's a little bit more. It's still symmetrical, but you can see the architects have taken some liberties with the style. It's not all straight and predictable. And Cindy says, you've covered some ground. Indeed, I have. And so many stories to tell. I've only told you a few, but I hope you've enjoyed discovering some of the backstory of the 7th arrondissement, formerly known as the 10th arrondissement after the French Revolution. A neighborhood that's evolved over time, that's attracted the affluent crowd. You know, once the Marais was not popular anymore, they came here. It was known as the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and it grew west. And who would have thought that Queen Margot once had a magnificent park in these parts, somewhere around the Rue de l'Université, somewhere in that area, a park that would be was as magnificent as the Tuileries Gardens. Who would have thought? Of course, there's nothing left of it. This is how I like Paris. This reminds me of 2021, between the lockdowns when we could walk around and there were fewer cars and fewer people around, and I think that was my favorite time in Paris. Out of the 3 decades I lived in Paris, this was my favorite time, was 2021. And I knew it would never come back again. But there are days like today which you can still enjoy a little bit of peace and quiet. That's so special, isn't it? I'm going to let you go at the end of the street so I can go on and meet my friend, because I'm going to go down the metro and the connection probably would cut off. Oh, you're so welcome, Paula. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Sharon is flying out in 36 days, and I saw someone was flying in tomorrow. I know a lot of you will be here in the fall. Hopefully the weather holds out for you. It's been really strange the last few weeks in August and early September now. We have heat this week in the forecast. It was chilly last week, who knows? Another school, you might have guessed, looking at the walls and the architecture, dating back probably to the exact same time. You see how many they built? And they were building them everywhere because they made school mandatory. And they wanted to have schools to welcome the children and turn them into French citizens. Schools that would be free, secular, and of course mandatory. You had to go to school. So we are here, you recognize this neighborhood at the back of Les Invalides, this massive complex that Louis XIV built, where Napoleon is buried, where so many good museums are located. You could spend 2 days in Les Invalides and not see it all. It's wonderful. So I'm going to flip around the camera so I can say a quick hello. Voila. See, I'm wearing short sleeves. It's really, it's probably 26, 27, 28 now, Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's pretty warm for almost 7 p.m. Oh, that must be another embassy. There are lots of embassies around here. I just want to say thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a great weekend. I'll be in touch like always, and I'll be meeting some of you in person on September 21st in Paris. Last peek at Paris. Some of you will be here in person soon. Avenue de la Motte Piquet we just came from. Another embassy here. All right, friends, have a great weekend and à bientôt.